Hi, how are you guys doing? So let's talk about the second part of chapter 13, where we're going to talk now that we're done with actually the third part, right? We're done with the cranial nerves. We're going to talk about the spinal nerves. So before I start, I just re-uploaded my, let's make sure this is central. I just re-uploaded my PowerPoints with this table. I think this table helps you. You don't need to turn anything in. It's just to help you to list the muscles served by the spinal nerves that we are going to talk or focus on here. Okay, so the other ones that are not in this list means we're not really gonna need to, or we're not required to know for the exam. So as we go, you can watch this video and print this table and, start filling it as we go. So we have 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 8 cervical nerves, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. The ones that form plexuses, and we're going to learn what plexuses are the cervical, lumbar, and sacral. So what we see in this table are plexuses. You see cervical, brachial, which is part of the cervical, lumbar, and sacral, and nerves that branch from these plexuses. So that's what we're going to be talking about here. So when you think about spinal nerves, look at this drawing and think that, get my pen here, that this is the posterior side and this is the anterior side, right? So this is the front. This is somebody's belly. Actually, not the belly, because here's starting in C1. This is the neck, okay? So do you see how C1 is here? And you have one nerve branching, a spinal nerve branching on top of C1, and another one branching on top of C2, one on top of C3, and so on until you get to C7. So you have C7, one nerve branching on top of vertebra cervical 7. But then, and this is called C7 as the name of the spinal nerve, but you have another spinal nerve called C8 coming from underneath of C7, of the vertebra C7. Meaning what? That from vertebra C7 down, all the spinal nerves arise from under the vertebra. Okay? Makes sense? So all the way to C7, they arise from the top of the vertebra. After C8 or after C7, C8, T1, and so on, under the vertebra. I don't know if I told you this because I was not the one doing the video when we talk about the vertebra. Actually, I didn't go into details about that. But one way to remember how many vertebrae you have, you think about at 7 a.m. So you said 7 cervical because 7 a.m. is the time you have breakfast. And then 12 p.m. is the thoracic. 12 p.m. is the time that you have lunch. And then 5 p.m. Sorry, my 12 doesn't look good here. 5 p.m. 5 lumbar is the time you have tea. And then you have another 5 and 1, just to make it easy for you to remember how many of each type of vertebrae we have. Okay. Note that after L2, I think, you don't have that very solid spinal cord. It's where, so the beginning of the lumbar region is where you have the cauda equina, right? And remember that that's where the lumbar plexuses are going to come from, and sacral. All right. So remember when we talked about the spinal cord in chapter 12? You watched that video from that guy that does amazing drawings. And he was talking about this being ventral. So what's ventral? Ventral is, sorry, told you wrong, dorsal. This is ventral. Ventral anterior, dorsal posterior, right? Okay, so remember you have a dorsal root and a ventral root, and they merge to make one nerve. So the nerve contains fibers that came as sensory fibers this way, and also motor fibers that are going to come this way. Okay, so the nerve is mixed, and remember, always the ventral root is going to bring dorsal root is going to bring sensory fibers, ventral root is going to bring have motor fibers. And the motor fibers here, we are talking about somatic and visceral. Okay, which ones are the visceral? The autonomic ones, fibers that are sent to regions that are going to be controlled by the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, and then you're gonna have a ganglion here. Let me show you here. See this bulgy part? That's the ganglion for the afferent or sensory, right? And then you have another type of ganglion here, and this is the autonomic ganglion. This is actually the sympathetic ganglion. Okay, when we talk about next chapter 14 about sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, we're going to show you how this is what is called the sympathetic trunk. Okay, and that's a ganglion from the sympathetic trunk. Any ramification from the nerve is not called root now, because now we already formed the nerve. It's called ramus. So plural of ramus, rami. Okay? Okay, so with that said, I think we are ready to move to next slide. Here is just showing you how you have branches from these nerves that are going to innervate muscles that are only in the trunk, mostly when we talk about the thoracic nerves. So thoracic nerves are not going to really make plexuses and go down the limbs or do anything other than innervate the trunk. Okay, so dorsal rami innervate the back of your back muscles, and ventral rami, like this, are going to innervate muscles in your abdomen, okay, and in your thorax. Actually, more in the thorax. The abdomen is going to be already innervated by the lumbar nerves. So let's start talking about these nerves. We have in the neck C1 through C5. So these are the name of the vertebra, but also the name of the nerves. Okay, so these are the rami, and the rami, they make like a crisscross, or they look braided. It looks like a braid. Okay, so if you're trying to follow where each one of these nerves go, look at that. Look at this craziness, and then there's a loop here. So it's super complex, and we don't have really to know, but you see how they merge. C1 is merging with C2, C2 is merging with C3, and so on. All this to tell you that they're braided. Okay, so this is what we call plexuses, and from these plexuses, what do we need to know here? That you have the phrenic nerve arising from it. And the phrenic nerve, which is right here, is going to innervate your diaphragm all the way under your lungs, that muscle that when it's dome shaped, is relaxed, you're exhaling air. When it's flat, it's contracted, you're inhaling air. Okay? So the phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm, which is a skeletal muscle. Is that important? Can you live without a diaphragm? No way, okay? Super important. That's why damage to the phrenic nerve is lethal, okay? Because you can't breathe anymore unless you have some type, you quickly put in some type of ventilation. Sad story, right? Then we have it's just showing here that you have the accessory nerves here, but remember how we said accessory nerves come from the cranial nerve, so this is a cranial nerve. You don't need to think about this in this context of spinal nerves because it's not a spinal nerve. And then in the table, I'm just circulating here the ones you need to know. The phrenic nerve is the one that when there's some irritation in that nerve for some unknown reason, it gives you hiccups. Okay, it's the nerve related to hiccups. It's spasms in the diaphragm. In the diaphragm is what leads to hiccup. Okay,